The morning sun filtered softly through the lace curtains of my kitchen, casting a delicate glow on the polished oak table where invitations to Emily's engagement party lay scattered alongside my carefully penned notes. The house hummed with the quiet anticipation of a celebration, the scent of fresh flowers mingling with the faint aroma of baking bread. I had spent the better part of the week preparing for this moment, Emily's step into a new chapter, a milestone I had long dreamed of witnessing with pride and joy. As I arranged the silverware one last time, my heart swelled with a mixture of excitement and nostalgia. Emily had always been the light of my life, my daughter whose laughter once filled these rooms and whose dreams I had nurtured since she was a little girl. I remembered the countless evenings we spent planning her future, the whispered hopes shared over steaming mugs of cocoa, the gentle way I had held her hand when life felt uncertain. Our bond had been a tapestry woven with years of love, trust, and unspoken understanding. Even when the world outside seemed harsh, inside this house we had built a sanctuary for each other. Today was supposed to be a celebration of that bond, the beginning of a new family branch blossoming with promise. I had envisioned the party filled with warmth, close friends, laughter, the clinking of glasses raised in heartfelt toasts. But beneath the surface of my excitement, an unshakable tension had been gnawing at me for days. Since Emily announced her engagement, there had been moments where her smiles felt forced, her eyes distant. I brushed it aside, attributing it to the whirlwind of planning and nerves. After all, weddings were stressful, and young couples often wrestled with the chaos of blending their lives and families together. I told myself to be patient, to trust that our relationship was solid enough to weather any storm. The living room was alive with chatter and music when guests began to arrive. Emily's fiancé, Daniel, stood by her side, his hand resting protectively over hers. Their happiness was almost tangible, a beacon in the warm glow of the evening. Friends and family mingled, sharing stories and raising glasses in celebration. I moved through the crowd with a smile, feeling the familiar comfort of being surrounded by those who cared. Yet every so often my eyes caught Emily's, a flicker of something unreadable, a shadow behind her gaze that made my chest tighten. When the moment came for Emily to speak, she stood with a grace that had always been hers, the room falling silent in anticipation. Her voice, usually so warm and inviting, carried an edge that sliced through the air like a knife. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her eyes locking onto mine with a coldness that left me breathless. "But I need to say something important. Mom, you're not part of this family anymore." The words hung between us, heavy and unforgiving. The room seemed to tilt, the faces around me blurring into a haze of confusion and disbelief. My mind raced, grasping for context, for some explanation that would soften the blow, but there was none. Emily's expression was resolute, her posture unwavering. It wasn't a fleeting outburst fueled by emotion, it was a declaration, a severing of ties that I had believed unbreakable. I felt my knees weaken, the chair behind me a distant refuge I could not reach fast enough. My voice caught in my throat, a silent scream trapped within. The laughter and cheers that had filled the room moments before evaporated into a suffocating silence. My own daughter, the one I had raised with love and sacrifice, had drawn a line so stark between us it felt like a chasm. The people around us shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene or give space to the wound that had just been inflicted in plain sight. As I sat there, stunned and trembling, memories flashed through my mind. The first day Emily walked into school with a crooked backpack and a shy smile, the nights I stayed awake nursing her fevers, the endless support through heartbreaks and triumphs. How could all of that mean so little now? The party continued around me, but I was trapped in a silence that deafened, my heart shattering in slow, unbearable shards. Later, as I retreated to the quiet of the guest room, the weight of Emily's words pressed down on me. The room felt foreign, the walls closing in with the cold reality that the daughter I had known might be slipping away. I tried to reach for my phone to call her to understand, but the lump in my throat made it impossible to speak. The joyous occasion I had imagined was now a haunting echo of what could have been. I reflected on our relationship, searching for signs I might have missed, the subtle changes in tone, the guarded conversations, the times she chose silence over sharing. Had I been blind to the growing distance? Had my love, so fierce and unwavering, somehow driven her away? The questions circled endlessly, offering no solace. That night, I lay awake listening to the distant sounds of laughter from the party, feeling the sharp sting of exclusion. The realization settled in like a cold shadow. The family I thought I belonged to was fracturing, and I was being left on the outside. The dreams I had woven for us, the future I had envisioned, were unraveling before my eyes. Yet amidst the pain, a quiet ember of resolve began to glow. Though I was reeling from the shock, I knew that I could not let this moment define me. The love I held for Emily was deep, but I also had to protect my own heart. Tomorrow, I promised myself I would face whatever came next with clarity and strength. Tonight, I allowed myself to grieve the loss of the family I thought we were. As the night deepened, I stared out the window at the stars scattered across the velvet sky. Somewhere out there, my daughter was making choices that excluded me, but I was still here, still breathing, still fighting to understand, still holding onto the hope that love might find a way to heal what had broken. The path ahead was uncertain, but I resolved to walk it with courage, one step at a time. The days that followed Emily's declaration were cloaked in a quiet that felt heavier than any confrontation. The initial shock had dulled into a persistent ache, a dull throb beneath the surface of my daily life. I found myself walking through our home with a strange sense of displacement, as if the walls themselves whispered that I no longer belonged here. Not in the family, not even in my own memories. The once familiar spaces now seemed alien, marked by absence and coldness that I couldn't quite explain. Emily's behavior shifted in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. At family dinners, her eyes would dart away when I tried to speak, her responses clipped and distant. Invitations to small gatherings and casual coffee dates became rare, then non-existent. Friends and relatives who had once greeted me warmly now glanced past me, their conversations folding into hushed tones whenever I approached. It was as if an invisible barrier had been erected overnight and I was left outside, desperate to understand where I had gone wrong. I tried to hold on to the hope that this was a temporary rift, that the stress of wedding planning and new relationships might be clouding Emily's judgment. I reached out to her, sending texts filled with warmth and concern, suggesting lunch dates and quiet talks. But my messages remained unanswered or were met with vague, polite refusals. Each closed door tightened the grip of loneliness around my heart. At times, I overheard fragments of conversations between Emily and Daniel's family, words that stung like thorns. Their voices, once welcoming, now held an undercurrent of dismissal, as if I were a shadow lingering where I no longer belonged. I caught glimpses of their glances, the way they exchanged looks when I entered the room, subtle but sharp reminders that my presence was no longer desired. It wasn't just Emily's rejection, it was a collective distancing, a silent agreement that I was an outsider in the family's new narrative. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the kitchen, watching Emily and Daniel prepare dinner with Daniel's mother nearby. I tried to join the conversation, offering a light-hearted comment about a recipe, but the response was a polite nod and a quick return to their own exchange. Emily barely met my eyes, and Daniel's mother excused herself moments later, leaving me alone with a sinking feeling that I was invisible. The emotional toll was relentless. I felt the sting of being sidelined, the quiet erosion of the place I had always considered my own. My opinions, once sought and valued, were now met with polite dismissal or ignored entirely. I voiced a suggestion about the seating arrangement for the wedding, only to be told it had already been decided without my input. Each slight, no matter how small, accumulated into a mountain of rejection. In the quiet moments alone, I grappled with a profound sadness. The daughter who had once confided in me was now a stranger wrapped in coldness. I questioned whether I had failed her somehow, whether my love, so abundant and unconditional, had been interpreted as something else entirely. The realization that Emily's harsh words from the party were not a momentary outburst, but a boundary she intended to maintain shattered any lingering hope of immediate reconciliation. Yet amid the hurt there was a flicker of understanding. Emily was forging a new life, creating a family unit that, at least for now, excluded me. The new dynamics were painful to accept, but they were real. I was no longer a central figure in her world, and the future we once imagined together had shifted beneath my feet. This recognition was a bitter pill to swallow, but it forced me to confront the reality rather than retreat into denial. I found myself retreating to the sanctuary of old photo albums, the pages heavy with images of laughter and shared moments now tinged with melancholy. Each photograph was a reminder of a past that felt increasingly distant, a life where Emily and I were inseparable. Now, those memories felt fragile, like shards of a broken mirror reflecting a love that was no longer fully intact. Friends who noticed my quiet withdrawal offered words of comfort, but their reassurances felt hollow against the backdrop of my isolation. I began to question my own worth, wondering if I was somehow unlovable or if my presence had become a burden. The loneliness was not just physical, it was a profound emotional exile that gnawed at my sense of identity. Despite the pain, I refused to let despair consume me entirely. I sought solace in long walks through the neighborhood, the rhythm of my footsteps grounding me amidst the storm. I reached out to a therapist, hoping to navigate the tangled emotions with guidance and clarity. Through these sessions, I began to understand that Emily's rejection, painful as it was, did not diminish my value or the love I held within myself. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that the family I had known was changing, and I was being forced to redefine my place within it. The path forward was uncertain, but I felt a stirring of resilience beneath the sorrow. I couldn't control Emily's choices, but I could control how I responded. This was not the end of my story, only a painful chapter. In the weeks that followed, I noticed small moments of quiet courage. I started attending a local book club, reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. I poured myself into volunteer work, finding purpose beyond the walls of my fractured family. These endeavors did not erase the hurt, but they planted seeds of renewal and growth. Still, the ache of exclusion remained a constant companion. At family events, I often found myself on the periphery, watching Emily laugh and celebrate with others while I lingered in the shadows. Each smile she shared with Daniel's family felt like a reminder of my absence, a silent testament to the distance that had grown between us. One afternoon, I overheard Emily and Daniel discussing wedding plans in the next room. Their voices were light, filled with excitement about the future. But when Emily mentioned her mother, there was a hesitation, a quick shift in tone that spoke volumes. It became clear that my place in their lives was carefully circumscribed, a boundary drawn with deliberate care. The realization settled like a stone in my stomach. I was no longer part of the family unit Emily was building. The exclusion was not just emotional but practical, shaping the ways in which I could engage with her life. It was a loss that defied easy explanation, a grief for a connection that had been severed without ceremony. Yet, even in this desolation, I clung to a fragile hope. I reminded myself that relationships are complex and ever-changing, capable of healing and renewal in their own time. Though I was sidelined now, I resolved to remain open to the possibility of reconnection, even as I braced for further pain. In the quiet recesses of my heart, I began to gather strength, not in the hope of immediate reconciliation, but in the knowledge that I deserved respect and inclusion. Emily's rejection had fractured our bond, but it had not erased the love I held for her, nor the love I deserved in return. Each day was a lesson in endurance, a test of my capacity to hold space for loss and hope simultaneously. The family I once knew was no longer the one I inhabited, but I was learning to navigate this new reality with as much grace and courage as I could muster. The road ahead was uncertain and the wounds were fresh, but I was no longer standing at the edge of despair. Instead, I was taking tentative steps toward a future where I could reclaim my sense of self, regardless of how Emily chose to define our relationship. The morning after the engagement party arrived with a quiet stillness that felt heavier than the night before. The house was bathed in soft, pale light, but the warmth I had hoped to feel that day was absent. Instead, an icy chill settled over me, a cold realization that the words Emily had spoken were not fleeting or fueled by momentary frustration. They were a definitive fracture in the fabric of our relationship. Sitting alone at the kitchen table, I cradled a cup of untouched tea, my mind swirling with the weight of those words, "You're not part of this family anymore." The phrase echoed relentlessly, carving out a hollow space inside me where certainty once resided. I had spent all these years nurturing a bond I believed to be unbreakable, only to find that the foundation beneath it was crumbling without warning. The dreams I had held for our future, the shared holidays, the quiet afternoons knitting together, the laughter of grandchildren, now seemed like distant echoes from a life that might never be. The clarity of that painful truth left me breathless. As the morning light crept through the windows, I began to confront the implications of Emily's rejection. It was no longer just about emotional estrangement, it reached deeper into the practical realities of a life once intertwined. I realized that my place in the family's future was uncertain, especially concerning the legacy I had planned to leave behind. For years, I had envisioned passing on heirlooms, savings, and the inheritance from my modest estate to Emily as a symbol of my enduring love and faith in her. Now, with the distance growing between us, those plans felt fragile, vulnerable to the shifting tides of our fractured relationship. The thought unsettled me profoundly. I had always believed that love and family were intertwined in a way that transcended disagreements or hardships. But now, I was forced to reckon with the possibility that love alone might not guarantee inclusion or respect. The realization stirred a mix of sorrow and resolve within me. If Emily no longer wished to be part of my family, then I needed to protect myself and my legacy in ways I had never imagined. That afternoon, I sat down with a journal, the pages blank and waiting to be filled. I wrote with a trembling hand, pouring out the tumult of emotions, the heartbreak, the confusion, the aching hope for reconciliation that felt increasingly distant. But beneath the sorrow, a new determination began to take shape. I needed to reclaim control over my life and my future, independent of Emily's acceptance or rejection. This was not about punishment or bitterness, it was about self-preservation and dignity. The following day, I made an appointment with my attorney, a woman named Claire whom I had trusted for years. Sitting across from her in her tidy office, I explained the situation as honestly and calmly as I could. Claire listened attentively, her expression thoughtful but empathetic. She understood the delicate nature of family dynamics and the importance of ensuring that my wishes were respected, regardless of personal conflicts. Together, we began to review my will and financial plans. The documents, once straightforward and uncomplicated, now felt like battlegrounds where my intentions for the future needed to be clearly articulated and legally fortified. I decided to remove Emily as a beneficiary, a choice that felt both heartbreaking and necessary. Instead, I chose to allocate my estate to charities that had supported causes close to my heart and to dear friends who had stood by me through difficult times. This reallocation was not made lightly. It was an act of reclaiming agency over a future that felt increasingly uncertain. As Claire explained the legal steps involved, I felt a strange mixture of relief and grief. The act of rewriting my will was a tangible acknowledgement that the family I once knew was changing irrevocably. It was a protective measure, yes, but also a symbolic gesture, an assertion that my life, my love, and my legacy were mine to steward, regardless of the fractured ties with my daughter. Returning home that evening, I felt a quiet resolve settling within me. The pain of Emily's rejection was raw, but it no longer defined my worth or my capacity to move forward. I began to contemplate how I might rebuild my identity outside the shadow of her dismissal. The process of revising my will was only the beginning of a larger journey towards self-discovery and empowerment. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting deeply on the nature of family, love, and respect. I realized that unconditional love did not mean unconditional acceptance or inclusion, especially when boundaries were drawn so firmly. Respect, I concluded, must be mutual, and when it was absent, it was my right to protect myself and my future. This period of introspection was difficult, filled with waves of grief and moments of clarity. I thought about the countless small ways Emily had been withdrawing, her silences, the missed calls, the coldness at gatherings, and how these had all pointed to a growing divide. A part of me mourned what was lost, but another part acknowledged that sometimes love required letting go or redefining boundaries to preserve one's dignity. During this time, I also began to reach out to trusted friends, sharing my feelings and seeking their support. Their kindness and understanding reminded me that family could extend beyond biological ties and that community could provide solace in times of loneliness. Their encouragement helped me to envision a future where I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not just my role as a mother. One afternoon, as I sat by the window watching the leaves turn gold, I drafted a letter to Emily, not to confront or accuse, but to express my feelings honestly. I wrote of my love for her, my sorrow at the distance that had grown between us, and my hope that someday we might find a way back to one another. Yet, I also wrote of my need to protect myself, to ensure that my life's work and legacy would not be subject to the vagaries of rejection. The act of writing the letter was cathartic, a way to give voice to emotions I had been carrying silently. I did not send it immediately. Instead, I kept it close, a reminder that while the path was uncertain, I was choosing to face it with courage and clarity. As the weeks passed, I began to notice a subtle shift within myself. The pain of exclusion was still present, but it was tempered by a newfound strength. I was learning to separate my identity from Emily's acceptance, to find value in myself beyond the roles I had played. This was not an easy transformation. It was fraught with sorrow and self-doubt, but it was necessary. I understood now that the future I had imagined with Emily was no longer guaranteed. The family I had dreamed of was changing, and I had to adapt. Protecting my financial legacy was a practical step, but more importantly, it was a declaration that I was no longer willing to sacrifice my dignity for the hope of inclusion that might never come. That evening, as I closed the journal I had started weeks before, I felt a quiet resolve settling in my chest. The road ahead was uncertain and painful, but I was determined to walk it on my own terms. I would protect what was mine, not out of spite, but out of love for myself and the life I had built. And perhaps in time that love would be the foundation for healing, whether with Emily or within myself. The decision to amend my will was not one I took lightly, but once made, it spurred a flurry of deliberate action that felt both terrifying and liberating. I found myself navigating a new terrain where practicality and emotion entwined, each step a careful negotiation between protecting my interests and honoring the love I still held for Emily, however fractured our connection had become. The quiet house became a backdrop for this transformation, a space where old dreams were dismantled and new plans carefully constructed. I began by scheduling a series of meetings with Claire, my attorney, who guided me through the legal intricacies with a steady calm that I desperately needed. Together, we reviewed every detail of my estate plan, peeling back layers of documents that once felt like mere formalities but now took on urgent significance. I instructed her to remove Emily as a beneficiary on my will and any related financial accounts, a decision that cut deep but was necessary in the face of my daughter's explicit rejection. Instead, I chose to designate several charities I had long admired, organizations dedicated to education, women's empowerment, and environmental conservation. It was a way to ensure that my legacy would serve causes aligned with my values, even if it no longer passed through family hands. Alongside this, I redirected portions of my inheritance to friends who had been pillars of support during my most challenging days. These were people who had listened without judgment, offered shoulders to lean on, and reminded me of my worth when I doubted it myself. This reallocation was not made out of spite but as a statement of gratitude to those who had become, in many ways, my chosen family. The process demanded meticulous attention. I signed documents in Claire's office, each signature a symbolic severing and reaffirmation. It was painful to acknowledge that the mother-daughter bond I had cherished was now so fragile it could no longer anchor my future plans. Yet there was a strange sense of empowerment in taking control, in asserting my autonomy where before I had deferred to hope and faith in family ties. Returning home after one of these meetings, I took stock of my belongings with new eyes. The house, once filled with the anticipation of shared celebrations, now felt like a repository of memories tinged with loss. I began organizing items, photographs, heirlooms, and keepsakes, deciding which to keep close and which to entrust to friends or charitable causes. Each object carried a story, and letting go was a bittersweet act of both mourning and liberation. Conversations with close friends became lifelines in this period. I shared my plans and fears, their gentle encouragement reinforcing my resolve. "You're reclaiming your narrative," one friend said softly, reminding me that this was not about retaliation but about self-respect and dignity. Their words echoed in my mind as I navigated the complex emotions tied to redefining family and legacy. At the same time, I began to set practical boundaries with Emily. When invitations to family events came, I chose which to accept and which to decline, prioritizing my emotional well-being over appearances. I learned to say no without guilt, a skill that felt revolutionary after years of bending to accommodate others. It was a small but significant assertion of agency in a landscape where I had often felt powerless. In the quiet moments between these decisions, I also started to explore new interests that had long been shelved. I enrolled in a local art class, tentatively picking up brushes and colors, allowing creativity to flow where grief and uncertainty had once dominated. Painting became a refuge, a way to express emotions I couldn't yet articulate in words. Each stroke on the canvas was a step toward healing, a reclaiming of joy amidst the shadows. I also joined a community gardening group, reconnecting with the earth and the steady rhythm of growth. Tending to plants gave me a sense of purpose and renewal, a reminder that life continues to sprout in unexpected places even after loss. These activities expanded my world beyond the confines of familial strife and opened doors to friendships and experiences I had not anticipated. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old letters, I came across a note Emily had written me years ago, filled with love and gratitude. The contrast between that tender expression and our current estrangement was stark and painful. I folded the letter carefully, placing it atop my journal. It was a reminder that while the present was fractured, the past held moments of connection that could not be erased. Despite the strides I was making, I was not blind to the ache that lingered beneath the surface. Some days were harder than others, times when loneliness pressed in and doubts crept back. But I met those moments with the tools I was building: self-care, support from friends, and the quiet knowledge that I was acting to protect my dignity and future. As the wedding day drew nearer for Emily and Daniel, I made peace with the reality that my role in their celebrations would be limited. I sent a thoughtful card with wishes for their happiness but chose not to attend the rehearsal dinner, understanding that my presence might not be welcomed or would only deepen the divide. This decision, though painful, was an act of compassion toward myself and the new family Emily was forming. Throughout this journey, I discovered strength in vulnerability. Opening up about my experience to a trusted counselor helped me process the complex emotions swirling within me. I learned to distinguish between love and codependency, recognizing that protecting myself was not a betrayal of motherhood but an act of self-preservation. The legal changes I made to my will were finalized with a sense of solemnity. Sitting with Claire as she handed me the updated documents, I felt a mix of sorrow and relief. The path ahead was uncertain, but I had taken concrete steps to ensure that my life's end would be governed by my wishes, not by fractured relationships or unspoken resentments. In reclaiming control over my legacy, I also reclaimed a piece of myself that had been lost in the shadows of rejection. It was a quiet victory, one that did not erase the grief but balanced it with hope and determination. I was learning that family could be redefined, that love could exist alongside boundaries, and that my worth was not contingent on another's acceptance. As I closed the folder containing my new will, I felt a subtle shift within, a burgeoning sense of independence and peace. The future was no longer a landscape of uncertainty dominated by fear, but a canvas where I could paint my own story, shaped by resilience, love, and self-respect. The journey was far from over, but with each deliberate step, I was moving toward a life lived authentically, on my own terms. When I finally summoned the courage to tell Emily about the changes to my will, the air between us was thick with unspoken tension. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that usually invited warmth and conversation, but this time the space felt brittle, as if one wrong word could shatter what little connection remained. I found her in the sunlit corner of the living room, scrolling through her phone, her expression guarded yet distant. "Emily," I began cautiously, my voice steady despite the turmoil roiling inside me. She looked up, a flicker of surprise passing across her features before she masked it with practiced composure. "There's something important I need to discuss with you." She nodded, setting her phone aside, though the coolness in her eyes warned me that this conversation would not be easy. "I've made some changes to my will," I said, choosing my words with care. "Given everything that's happened, I've decided to remove you as a beneficiary." I watched her face closely, searching for a reaction, bracing for the inevitable storm. Her eyes darkened and a sharp edge crept into her voice. "You're serious? After everything, that feels like a betrayal." The word hit me like a fist. Betrayal. I understood her pain, but I also knew I had to stand firm. "It's not about betrayal, Emily. It's about respect and boundaries. I love you, but I can't ignore the way you've excluded me from your life. I need to protect myself and my legacy." She scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "You're punishing me for wanting to build my own family. You're making this about money instead of love." I shook my head gently, refusing to be drawn into an argument fueled by hurt and misunderstanding. "This isn't punishment. It's a consequence of choices made. Respect and inclusion can't be taken for granted. They have to be earned and maintained." The room seemed to shrink as the tension mounted. Emily's gaze hardened, her voice dropping to a whisper filled with accusation. "You've changed, Mom. You're not the woman I thought you were." For a moment, the daughter I had raised, the one who once confided in me and sought my guidance, felt impossibly distant. Yet beneath the hurt, I found a wellspring of calm resolve. "People change, Emily, and sometimes those changes are necessary to protect who we are. I'm setting boundaries because I have to, not because I want to." She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I don't know who you are anymore. Maybe this is goodbye." Her words were a dagger, but I held steady. "If that's what you choose, I can't stop you, but know this, I will always love you. That doesn't mean I will allow myself to be disregarded or disrespected." She turned away, her shoulders stiff as she walked toward the door. I fought the urge to reach out to beg for reconciliation, but I knew that would only undermine the boundaries I had set. Instead, I let her go, carrying the weight of the moment with a mixture of grief and strength. After she left, the silence in the house was profound. I sat alone, fingers trembling slightly as I replayed the confrontation in my mind. The pain was raw, but beneath it, a quiet clarity emerged. This was the new dynamic between us, a relationship no longer defined by unconditional love but by mutual respect that was, for now, absent. In the days that followed, I reflected on the conversation and what it meant for our future. I realized that love, while powerful, could not bridge every divide, especially when boundaries were ignored or dismissed. I needed to accept that the mother-daughter relationship I had cherished was evolving into something unfamiliar, something that required me to stand firm in my own dignity. I began to establish clearer boundaries in other interactions as well. When Emily's calls were infrequent and terse, I responded with kindness but guarded my emotions. I stopped chasing invitations or explanations, choosing instead to focus on my own well-being. It was a painful adjustment, but necessary to preserve my sense of self. Friends who witnessed the transformation in our relationship offered support and perspective. One confidante reminded me gently, "Karen, you're not responsible for fixing what isn't broken by your actions." Sometimes, setting boundaries is the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others. Those words became a mantra, grounding me when the loneliness threatened to overwhelm. At family gatherings, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Where once I had been at the center, I now occupied a more peripheral space. Conversations with Emily were brief and guarded, often overshadowed by the presence of Daniel's family, whose subtle exclusion was unmistakable. I learned to navigate these moments with grace, choosing silence over confrontation, dignity over resentment. One evening, as I sat quietly at a holiday dinner, I caught Emily's eye across the table. There was a flicker of something, regret perhaps, or a longing for connection, but it was quickly masked by a polite smile. I returned the smile, acknowledging the complexity of our bond without surrendering my boundaries. The confrontation over the will had crystallized a new reality. Our relationship would no longer be defined by unconditional closeness but by cautious distance and respect. It was a painful truth, but also a necessary one. I had to protect my heart and my future, even if it meant accepting a version of family that was different from what I had dreamed. In the weeks that followed, I focused on nurturing myself and rebuilding my life outside the shadow of rejection. I immersed myself in creative pursuits, community involvement, and friendships that reinforced my sense of belonging. These endeavors did not erase the pain but offered a foundation upon which I could stand firmly. The experience also taught me valuable lessons about love and boundaries, lessons I carried with me as I navigated the uncertain terrain of our fractured relationship. I came to understand that love without respect could become harmful and that setting limits was not an act of cruelty but of self-care. Though the path was marked by sorrow and loss, I embraced the opportunity to reclaim my dignity and define my own worth. The confrontation with Emily was not an end but a turning point, a moment that compelled me to stand tall, to honor my needs, and to prepare for whatever the future might hold. In this new chapter, I was no longer willing to be an afterthought or a casualty of hurt feelings. I was the protagonist of my own story, forging a life where love and respect were intertwined and where my boundaries were honored, even if at a cost. The journey was far from over, but I faced it with a strength born of pain and hope, a strength that would carry me forward whatever came next. The months after the confrontation with Emily unfolded with a quiet determination I had never thought I'd possess. The house that had once echoed with shared laughter and whispered dreams now held a different kind of silence, one not filled with absence but with space for growth. I found myself waking each morning with a cautious hope, a fragile seedling of peace taking root amidst the ashes of rejection. I moved into a modest apartment not far from the neighborhood, a place that felt like a sanctuary rather than a reminder of what had been lost. Unpacking boxes filled with years of memories, I realized that this was not just a physical relocation but a symbolic one, a step toward reclaiming my life on my own terms. The walls, bare and waiting, invited me to paint a new narrative, one where I was the protagonist, not a sidelined character. In this new chapter, I rediscovered passions long dormant. I enrolled in botany classes at the local community college, immersing myself in the study of plants and the cycles of growth and renewal. Walking through greenhouses and tending to seedlings, I found a soothing rhythm that mirrored the healing unfolding within me. There was solace in the patient unfolding of petals, in the quiet resilience of nature that refused to be defined by darkness. Painting, too, became a vital outlet. With brush in hand, I gave color and form to emotions that words could not capture. Each canvas was a conversation with myself, a dialogue of grief, hope, anger, and love. The act of creation rekindled a sense of joy that had been buried beneath layers of hurt. In the swirl of colors, I found fragments of my former self blending with a new, stronger identity. Alongside these personal pursuits, I built a circle of support that was chosen rather than given. Friends became my family, people who saw me, who listened without judgment, and who celebrated my small victories. Among them was Arthur, a gentle soul whose kindness was a balm to my weary heart. Our companionship was quiet and comforting, a testament to the fact that love could be found in unexpected places and at unexpected times. Through therapy and reflection, I learned to untangle the threads of my worth from the rejection I had endured. I understood that my value was inherent, not contingent upon Emily's acceptance or anyone else's approval. This realization was both freeing and humbling, a reminder that dignity comes from within, not from external validation. I allowed myself to grieve fully the loss of the family I had imagined, the pain of exclusion, and the loneliness that accompanied it. But I also embraced the possibility of healing, recognizing that wounds, though deep, could become sources of strength. The journey was neither linear nor easy, but with each step I grew more rooted in my own truth. The estrangement from Emily remained a source of sorrow, a quiet ache that never fully faded. Yet, I no longer defined myself by that absence. Instead, I focused on the present, the relationships I nurtured, the passions I pursued, and the life I was rebuilding. I learned that family could be as much about choice as it was about blood, and that sometimes the most important family is the one we create for ourselves. One afternoon, as I arranged fresh flowers in a vase by the window, I felt a profound sense of peace. The light filtered through the petals, casting delicate shadows that danced across the room. In that moment, I understood that I had moved beyond being an afterthought, beyond the silence that once threatened to consume me. I was a woman who had spoken her truth, set her boundaries, and reclaimed her story. Life had not turned out as I had once envisioned, but it had offered me something equally precious, a chance to live authentically, with courage and grace. I was no longer defined by the fractures in my family, but by the resilience that allowed me to heal and grow. As the seasons changed, so did I, blossoming in ways I had never anticipated. When a woman who has been silent for too long decides to speak, she reshapes her world, not with anger or bitterness, but with the quiet strength of a heart that refuses to be diminished. I am that woman.